Martha Reed slapped her last coin onto the courthouse counter, but the young clerk didn't even bother to look up from his ledger. "That won't cover it, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with the casual indifference of someone who held power over another person's survival. Behind her, a woman laughed. Then another. Someone whispered the word obese, and someone else murmured, pathetic. The harsh Montana snow was already pressing hard against the frosted courthouse windows, as if the entire sky had decided this was a good day to bury the town of Red Hollow alive and Martha along with it. The eviction notice had been nailed to her door before sunrise. Failure to satisfy outstanding debt. Vacate by end of business. Her husband Gerald had been dead for 7 months, leaving behind a mountain of hidden debts. She had spent every day since taking in mending and selling eggs, scraping together exactly $41.30 against a $62 note. But in a town like Red Hollow, a widow's worth was strictly measured by what her husband left behind, and a full-figured, plus-sized woman like Martha was never allowed to simply exist without someone making a cruel note of it. "Mr. Briggs is not available to see you," the clerk said smoothly, though Martha knew the bank manager was sitting right in his office. "I am asking for an extension of 30 days, Martha said, placing her palms flat on the wood. She did not raise her voice. She had learned long ago that rising voices got women labeled hysterical, and she could not afford that. "That is a reasonable request, and I am making it civilly." From the benches behind her, Constance Albright, a wealthy townswoman, whispered loudly to her sister, $41. Gerald Reed couldn't manage his affairs when he was alive. I don't know why she thinks she can do any better. Bless her heart. Martha did not turn around. She didn't flush, and she didn't cry. She picked up her worn leather traveling bag, turned her back on the whispering women, and walked out of the courthouse with her head held perfectly straight. Outside, the freezing air cut through her thin wool coat. She had no home, no money, and no family within 300 miles. She stood on the snow-dusted steps, breathing in the sharp, icy air, refusing to let the panic set in. She was a woman the world had tried to discard more than once, and every single time she had picked herself up, brushed herself off, and walked into the next day. "You're Martha Reed." It wasn't a question. Martha turned. The man standing a few feet away was tall and lean, with a kind of lightly muscular frame built entirely by brutal outdoor labor. His coat was good wool but worn at the elbows, and his jaw looked like it had been carved directly from the Montana hills. But it was his eyes that caught her gray-blue, direct, and completely devoid of pity. Martha found the lack of pity to be an immense relief. "I am," she said. "Elias Ward," he said, keeping his hands at his sides. "I've got a ranch 6 miles north. I'm in need of a housekeeper." Martha looked at him, assessing the sudden offer. "You're offering me a job right now, on the courthouse steps?" "I've been watching you in there for 20 minutes, Elias said without embarrassment. "You didn't raise your voice once. You didn't cry. You made a reasonable argument. You didn't get what you needed, and you walked out with your spine straight." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "I've had 3 housekeepers in the past year, all 3 left inside of a month." "Why, my daughters. Specifically, my oldest, Nora. She's 15, and she's been trying to run that house since her mother passed 14 months ago. She doesn't take kindly to anyone she thinks is trying to take her mother's place. She drove the others off." "And you think I'll stay?" "I don't know what you'll do, Mrs. Reed," Elias said honestly, "but I know you need a place to sleep tonight, and I need someone at that ranch who won't be gone by morning. Those 2 facts seem like they might be useful to each other." Martha looked out at the blinding white street. "What does the job pay?" "Room, board, and $4 a month." "I'll need $4.50. Elias studied her for a second, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Done." The wagon ride to the ranch was completely silent. When the house finally came into view through the driving snow, Martha saw a solid 2-story structure with a wraparound porch. Standing dead center on that porch was a tall, dark-haired teenage girl with her arms crossed over her chest. Her chin was set at an angle that communicated everything Martha needed to know about the incoming war. Elias pulled the horses to a halt and climbed down. "Nora, this is Mrs. Reed. She'll be helping with the house." "Hello, Nora," Martha said calmly. Nora's eyes traveled over Martha's heavy, sturdy frame with a particular calculated cruelty that grieving teenagers reserve for adults they've decided to destroy. It was a comprehensive assessment meant to break Martha on the spot. "You're fat," Nora said flatly. "Nora," Elias warned, his voice dropping low and dangerous. "She is," Nora shrugged without inflection. "I'm just saying what's true." Martha didn't blink. She didn't look away, and she didn't let the insult pierce her armor. "I am," Martha replied evenly, "and you're saying it to be cruel. We both know it. So let's skip the part where I pretend I didn't notice, and you pretend you weren't trying to hurt me. Instead, why don't you tell me where the kitchen is so I can start supper?" Nora's eyes narrowed. None of the other housekeepers had ever responded like that. They had cried or scolded or run to Elias. Martha simply stood her ground like an unmovable mountain. "Kitchen's in the house," Nora spat. "Most kitchens are," Martha agreed pleasantly. She picked up her bag, walked past the stunned teenager and stepped inside. The house was freezing and cluttered. It smelled of old wood smoke and the distinct hollow scent of a mother's absence. Dishes were stacked high, laundry was draped over chairs, and a thick layer of dust covered the furniture. A small face peered around the kitchen doorframe. It was Elsie, the 10-year-old. She was thin and solemn, watching Martha with the vigilant, quiet eyes of a deer assessing a predator. "Hello," Martha said softly. "I'm going to start supper. Are you hungry?" Elsie stared, then gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Good. I'll need someone to show me where the dry goods are. Could you do that?" Elsie stepped into the kitchen and pointed to a cabinet. Nora hovered in the hallway, watching with absolute seething resentment. By the time Elias came in from the barn, the kitchen was radiating heat. 6-year-old Clara had bounded into the room, innocently announcing that Martha was very big, to which Martha had smiled and agreed. Supper was simple beans, salt pork, and hot biscuits, but it was the first proper meal the family had eaten in a long time. Elias ate steadily. Elsie ate carefully. Clara chattered about her day. But Nora took one bite of her food, pushed the bowl away, and loudly declared it was too salty to eat. Martha didn't argue. She simply tasted the food, confirmed it was perfectly fine, and calmly made the girl a piece of toast instead. She knew Nora was testing the fences, waiting for Martha to snap. Later that night, as Martha was washing the dishes alone in the dim light of the kitchen, she heard footsteps stop right behind her. "You won't last," Nora whispered from the shadows. "Mrs. Calloway lasted 3 weeks. Miss Hoffman left after 9 days, and she was crying when she did." Martha dried a bowl, set it on the shelf, and slowly turned around. In the lamplight, the fierce 15-year-old looked less like a general and more like a terrified, exhausted child, carrying a weight far too heavy for her shoulders. "I'm going to make your life miserable," Nora promised, her voice shaking with desperate hostility. "You might try," Martha agreed softly. She hung the dish towel over the back of a chair and met the girl's eyes. "But I'm going to stay anyway, because I don't have anywhere else to go, and because even if I did, something tells me this house desperately needs someone who won't run. Good night, Nora." Martha walked past the stunned teenager and retreated to her narrow, freezing room off the kitchen. As the blizzard howled against the Montana glass, Martha Reed laid her head on her thin pillow. The world had tried to discard her today, but as she listened to the quiet breathing of the sleeping ranch, she knew one thing for certain: she had finally found ground worth holding, and she wasn't going anywhere. The week shaped itself around a rhythm that felt fragile, like thin ice on a winter pond that might hold your weight or might crack without warning. Martha worked through the house room by room, cleaning and organizing, learning the architecture of the family's grief before she attempted to truly live inside it. She found Caroline Ward's presence everywhere. A dried flower pressed between the pages of a cookbook, a pair of women's gloves folded neatly in the linen cabinet, faded pencil marks on the back hallway doorframe tracking the girl's heights, the last one reading Clara, June 1879. Clara had been 3 when her mother died. Martha ran her fingers over the wood, closed the door gently, and went back to work. Nora's prank started on the 3rd day. Martha went to put on her spare dress, the one she kept on the hook behind her door, and found that someone had sewn the sleeves entirely shut. It wasn't done roughly or in anger. The stitches were small, even, and precise, which told Martha that 15-year-old Nora was an accomplished seamstress who had taken her time. Martha didn't complain. She calmly opened her sewing kit, spent 20 minutes picking out the stitches, put the dress on, and said absolutely nothing about it at supper. The next morning, the salt had been moved to the sugar tin and the sugar to the salt box. Martha caught the trap before she cooked the oats, swapped them back, and served a perfect breakfast. On the 5th day, Martha went down into the freezing dark root cellar to fetch potatoes. She didn't realize until she was completely inside that the heavy wooden door's latch had been deliberately rigged with a piece of string and a dropped board. When the door swung shut behind her, it locked tight from the outside. She spent 40 freezing minutes in the pitch-black cellar. Just as the biting cold began to seep into her bones, she heard the heavy board lift. The door creaked open, spilling thin afternoon light into the cellar. 10-year-old Elsie stood there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Thank you," Martha said, picking up her basket of potatoes and stepping out into the light. Elsie nodded. She stared at her boots for a long time. "Did you know about the latch?" she whispered. "I saw how it was rigged," Martha said gently. Elsie swallowed hard. "She gets like this when she's scared," the little girl said, offering her older sister's defense in the quietest voice imaginable. It was the most words Elsie had spoken directly to Martha in 5 days. Martha received the words like water in a drought. "I know," she said. Elsie looked up, her solemn gray eyes searching Martha's face. "She's not bad." "No," Martha agreed softly. "She's not." Something eased in Elsie's face, an almost imperceptible loosening, like a tightly clenched fist opening one finger at a time. That evening, after supper, Elsie silently appeared at Martha's elbow by the wash basin, picked up a dish towel without being asked, and began to dry. They washed the dishes side by side in a comfortable, profound silence. As Martha put the last plate away, Elsie kept her eyes on her towel and whispered, "Mama used to sing when she did the dishes. It was a church song. I don't know the name, but she had a good voice." "I believe it," Martha smiled. Elsie folded the towel precisely. She looked at her own hands, then looked directly up at Martha. "I don't want you to leave." The words were so unguarded, so painfully direct, that Martha had to look away for a fraction of a second to compose herself. "I'm not leaving," Martha promised. "Nora will keep trying," Elsie warned. "I know what Nora will keep doing," Martha said, turning back to face the girl with absolute certainty. "And I'm still not leaving. You can count on that, Elsie. It is not up for discussion." The accident happened 4 days later. It happened the way terrible things always do, suddenly, violently, tearing right through the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Martha was in the kitchen when she heard 6-year-old Clara screaming from the direction of the barn. It wasn't the sound of a child crying over a scraped knee. It was a high, piercing shriek of sheer, unadulterated terror. Martha burst out the back door before she even made a conscious decision to move. She was a heavy, plus-sized woman, carrying weight the world constantly told her made her slow and useless. She was not a woman built for running. She felt the heavy strain in her chest and legs with every step, but she ran anyway, sprinting across the frozen, rutted ground. Clara was standing in the open doorway of the barn, her tiny face ghost white, pointing upward and screaming a single word over and over, "Elsie! Elsie! Elsie!" Martha threw her head back and looked up. High above on the steep frozen pitch of the barn roof, Elsie was slipping. The girl had climbed out through the upper hayloft door to retrieve a lost toy, but the frost-rimmed shingles offered no grip. One of Elsie's feet was dangling over the terrifying drop, her small freezing hands frantically scrabbling against the icy wood, finding no purchase. "Don't move," Martha roared, her voice echoing across the yard like thunder. "Elsie, listen to me. Do not move." "I can't," Elsie shrieked, her voice fracturing in pure panic. "My foot is slipping. I hear you. Stop moving. I am coming." Martha lunged into the barn. She grabbed the ancient rickety hayloft ladder. The dry wood groaned and swayed dangerously under her heavy frame, but she climbed it hand over hand, fueled by pure adrenaline, hauling herself up until she burst through the upper hayloft door. The sky above was enormous and gray. The frozen ground was a dizzying, deadly drop below. Elsie was 4 feet to Martha's right, crying hysterically, hanging on by nothing but the friction of her wool coat against the ice. "Elsie, look at me," Martha commanded, her voice an anchor of absolute calm. Elsie turned her head, her eyes wide, dark and utterly terrified. "Good. Keep looking at me," Martha said. She shifted her weight, ignoring the terrifying groan of the shingles beneath her boots. Slowly, methodically, she inched across the frozen pitch. "I am coming to you. Don't look down. Don't look at anything but my face." "I'm sorry," Elsie sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I just wanted Clara's ball. It doesn't matter. Look at me." Martha reached out, her thick, sturdy arm wrapping completely around Elsie's small waist. The second Martha made contact, Elsie let go of the shingles and lunged, grabbing handfuls of Martha's heavy coat with a desperate white-knuckled grip of someone who had been holding on alone for far too long. "I've got you," Martha grunted, bearing the sudden shift in weight. "I've got you." Using every ounce of her strength, her balance, and her iron will, Martha dragged them both backward, sliding over the frost until they tumbled safely through the hayloft door, collapsing onto the wooden floor inside. It took them 7 minutes to climb back down the ladder to solid ground. By the time Martha's boots hit the dirt floor of the barn, her legs gave out. She sat down heavily on a hay bale, her hands shaking violently. Clara threw herself at Elsie, sobbing, and the 2 young sisters clung to each other. Standing in the doorway of the barn was Nora. She had sprinted from the house just in time to see Martha pull Elsie through the loft door. The 15-year-old general was standing completely still, her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide. Without a word, Nora rushed forward, dropping to her knees in the dirt. She grabbed Elsie and Clara, pulling them both into a fierce, desperate embrace that made the massive barn feel small. Then, slowly, Nora lifted her head and looked over Elsie's shoulder straight at Martha. Nora's eyes were wet with tears. For one brief, unguarded moment, all the hostility, all the armor, and all the desperate cruelty vanished. The terrified 15-year-old girl underneath was completely visible. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. She simply looked away before the vulnerability could break her. But the war was over. That night, the real blizzard finally hit. It wasn't a gentle snowfall. It was the kind of brutal, howling Montana storm that rattled the window frames and reminded humanity exactly who was in charge. Elias banked the fires high and checked every latch. The house was a sealed, freezing fortress. After supper, Martha stood in the kitchen and pulled Caroline Ward's handwritten cookbook down from the top shelf. She flipped carefully through the faded pages, stopping at the recipe for apple cake with cinnamon. In the margins, written in a slightly newer ink, Caroline had added 4 words: "For my girls, always." Martha didn't ask for permission. She went down to the cellar for apples, gathered the flour, the butter, and the cinnamon, and she baked. By 8 o'clock, the entire house smelled like warm sugar, baking apples, and cinnamon. The scent drifted into the front room, wrapping around the grieving family like a warm blanket. Martha didn't hear Nora enter the kitchen. She just became aware of the girl standing silently in the doorway. "That's her recipe," Nora whispered, her voice stripped of all its edge. Martha kept her eyes on the oven. I found the cookbook on the shelf. I should have asked first. I'm sorry if—" "No." Nora took a slow step into the kitchen. She made it every winter. The first big snow. She said it was a tradition. "Then it's still a tradition," Martha said gently. Nora stared at the warm iron stove. She looked entirely lost, like a soldier whose war had suddenly ended, leaving her without a map. "She would have liked you," Nora said softly. Martha finally turned around. "Your mother?" Nora's jaw trembled. She swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady. She didn't like people who back down. She always said the world is full of people who fold when it gets hard. She said the ones worth keeping are the ones who don't. Nora turned and walked toward the doorway. She stopped, her hand lingering on the wooden frame. Without looking back, she whispered, "I'll go get the plates." The next morning, the world outside was buried beneath 3 feet of pristine white snow. Inside the Ward Ranch, everything had fundamentally changed. Not fixed, not perfectly resolved, but rearranged into something capable of holding life again. When Elias came into the kitchen from the freezing barn, he stopped dead in his tracks. Sitting around the warm stove were his 3 daughters. Clara was giggling, Elsie was buttering toast, and Nora, who hadn't let anyone help her in 14 months, was standing beside Martha, quietly showing her exactly how much coffee her father liked in his cup. Elias looked at Martha. He didn't smile, and he didn't speak. He simply sat down at the table, taking the hot cup of coffee from her hands, looking like a man who had finally found his way out of the dark. The knock on the heavy wooden door came on the 3rd morning after the blizzard, when the sun had finally broken through the clouds, and the roads were passable for a man on a strong horse. Elias was out in the south field, leaving Martha as the only adult in the house. When she looked through the kitchen window and saw the rider dismounting, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front door, opening it before the man could even raise his fist to knock. The man standing on the porch was entirely out of place in ranch country. He wore a heavy wool coat with gleaming brass buttons, expensive leather boots that had clearly never seen mud, and a hat angled with practiced, arrogant precision. He had pale eyes and a broad, handsome face, sporting the kind of smile specifically designed to make people trust him before they had time to think. "Morning, ma'am," he said pleasantly. "I'm looking for Elias Ward. I am Lucian Vale. I represent the Northern Territories Land and Trust Company." Martha looked at him steadily, her sturdy frame blocking the doorway. She did not invite him inside. "He's out. What's the nature of your business?" Vale's smile didn't waver, but his eyes swept over her plain dress and heavy figure. "Just some paperwork to settle up. A small matter of a delinquent account. Nothing that needs troubling a housekeeper over." He said the word housekeeper like it was a closed door. "I'll wait for him." "You can wait out here," Martha said flatly, "or you can leave your card and come back." Vale studied her, slightly taken aback by her absolute refusal to be intimidated. "I'll wait," he said smoothly. Martha turned and walked back to the kitchen where Nora was finishing her breakfast. "There is a man named Lucian Vale on the porch," Martha said quietly. Nora dropped her fork. The color drained completely from the teenager's face, leaving her the color of old ash. All the fierce, general-like hostility she usually carried evaporated, replaced by genuine, unarmored terror. "He's been here before," Nora whispered, her jaw trembling. "He's been trying to buy the ranch for 2 years. Papa refuses to sell, and now he's coming to the door." Nora pushed back from the table so violently her chair scraped hard against the floorboards. "Where is he? I'll—" "Nora." Martha caught the girl's arm. It was the first time she had ever touched her. Nora went rigid instantly. "Let me go," she hissed through her teeth. "He will use whatever you say," Martha warned, her voice an anchor of calm in the panicked kitchen. "Men like that always do. He came here at dawn, when he knew your father was out in the fields. You understand what that means? He came when he thought this house was undefended. If you go out there angry, you give him exactly the reaction he is looking for." Nora stared at Martha, her chest heaving. Slowly, the teenager's arm unclenched. "I'll handle him," Martha said. "Go out the back. Run to the south field and fetch your father. Go fast, and come straight back." As Nora sprinted out the back door, Martha returned to the front porch. Vale was still standing there, exuding a quiet, lethal confidence. "You mentioned a delinquent account, Mr. Vale," Martha said, folding her hands neatly over her apron. "A promissory note on the east pasture," Vale replied easily. $48. I acquired it from First Territorial Bank 2 weeks ago." "Then the transfer of the instrument would have been registered with the county recorder's office," Martha stated. She kept her voice even, pleasant, and utterly without edge. "Mr. Ward will naturally want to verify that recorded documentation before entertaining any conversation about terms. I'm sure a man of your vast professional experience understands standard legal procedure." A beat of heavy silence passed. Vale's smile remained glued in place, but something behind his pale eyes shifted a minor irritated recalculation. He hadn't expected the fat, plain-looking housekeeper to understand property law. "Of course," Vale said smoothly. "I'd expect nothing less." "Good," Martha nodded. "In the meantime, I believe you have a long ride back." Before Vale could respond, Elias rode into the yard with Nora sprinting a few paces behind his horse. Elias swung down from the saddle, his face like thunder, and took the porch steps in 2 long strides. "Ward," Vale greeted him, "I was just informing your housekeeper that I now hold the note on your east pasture. I'm a reasonable man, Elias. My offer from last year still stands. $1,200 for the ranch, outright. A man in your position, 3 daughters, no wife. A struggling ranch ought to think carefully about what he's protecting and what he's sacrificing to protect it." "The note isn't due until April 15th, Elias said, his voice deadly quiet. "I will make the payment, in full. Get off my property." Vale tilted his head, his polite facade finally dropping. "I'll hold you to that." He turned toward his horse but stopped, looking back at Martha. "Oh, by the way, Mrs. Reed, I wonder if you're aware that I also hold another instrument rather closer to home for you." Martha went perfectly still. "Gerald Reed's outstanding debt," Vale smiled, a vicious glint in his eyes. $21.70. I purchased it 6 weeks ago as part of a small portfolio acquisition. I know you've been struggling to pay it." Vale looked at Elias. "I have no interest in making your life difficult, Mrs. Reed, but a debt is a debt. And as the current holder, I have legal options available to me. Options I would prefer not to exercise if Mr. Ward would just be reasonable about selling this ranch." The threat hung in the freezing air, loud and clear. Vale was going to weaponize Martha's personal debt against Elias. He tipped his hat and rode out of the yard, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. "He's going to use it," Elias said, staring at the empty road. "Use it how?" Nora demanded. "It's her debt. It has nothing to do with our ranch." "It doesn't have to," Martha said, her voice heavy with the grim reality of the situation. "He just has to make it look like it does in front of a judge. He's building a narrative, a struggling rancher who can't pay his own notes, harboring a delinquent debtor. Piece by piece, he paints a picture of financial incompetence and disorder. Then, he asks the court to let him foreclose on the property to make it all go away." Elias turned around. He looked at Martha, then at Nora, his mind racing through the trap Vale had just set. He walked off the porch, standing in the snow for a long moment with his back to them, doing the terrible hard arithmetic of survival. When Elias turned back around, his face was set in absolute stone. "Martha," Elias said. He almost never used her given name. "There is a way to protect both this ranch and your debt situation, if you're willing." Martha looked at him carefully. "Say it plain." Elias met her eyes. "Marry me." Nora gasped. Elsie, who had silently crept onto the porch, went completely rigid. "A married woman's debts legally transferred to her husband under Montana territorial law," Elias explained, his voice flat and practical. And a married man's property is significantly harder to encumber without cause. It doesn't solve everything, but it immediately closes two of Vale's legal loopholes at once. He took a breath. It would be a strictly legal arrangement. Practical. You'd have the same job, the same room, the same terms. Nothing would change in how this house runs. Martha looked at the rugged, exhausted man in front of her. She thought about her dead husband, Gerald, and what a practical arrangement looked like when it was over. "And what does it look like in 5 years?" she asked. "When you want to marry someone else?" "I don't," Elias said simply, without an ounce of melodrama. "I've got 3 daughters, a ranch, and a predator circling my property like a hawk. I am not looking for anything beyond what this house needs, and what this house needs right now is someone who can hold ground. You've been doing that since the day you arrived." The porch was dead quiet. Nora was looking at Martha with a complicated, layered expression. Buried somewhere in the teenager's fierce, terrified eyes was something that looked miraculously like hope. "Yes," Martha said finally, "on 2 conditions." Elias waited. "The $21 becomes your legal burden, but I will manage it. I'll work it off out of my wages. But I will not carry it as my personal failure while Vale uses it as a weapon against this family. Done. And the girls know the truth," Martha added firmly. "What this marriage is, and what it isn't. I will not have them confused about what's happening in their own home." Elias nodded slowly. "Done then." "Yes," Martha said. "I'll marry you, Elias Ward." He extended his rough, calloused hand. She shook it. It was not romantic. It was exactly what it was, a survival pact between 2 people who refused to break, and for now, that was more than enough. 2 days later, Elias drove the wagon into Red Hollow with Martha beside him, and the 3 girls riding in the back. They walked into the courthouse and stood before the very same young clerk who had refused to give Martha a 30-day extension just a month prior. The boy's smug face contorted into uncomfortable shock as Elias laid the marriage paperwork on his counter. He stamped it in absolute silence. As they stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the ink on their marriage certificate barely dry, Constance Albright walked out of the general store across the street. She froze. Martha braced herself. She had a lifetime of practice waiting for the cruel insults that came from women like Constance Albright. Constance crossed the street, stopping at the bottom of the snowy steps. She looked up at Martha, Elias, and the 3 girls. Her face was doing something Martha had never seen before. It was crumbling with regret. "Mrs. Ward," Constance said, her voice shaking. It took Martha a full second to realize the wealthy townswoman was addressing her. "Mrs. Albright." Constance pressed her lips together, tears brimming in her eyes. "Lucian Vale took my brother's farm in 1876, she blurted out, the words tumbling from her mouth like a desperate confession. "He bought a note my brother couldn't pay. He filed 3 separate complaints with the county recorder, each one barely legal, each one designed to make my brother look incompetent. By the time anyone understood what was happening, the farm was completely gone." Constance wiped a tear from her cheek, looking directly at Martha. "I should have warned you. When you were standing at that counter begging for an extension, I should have said something. I didn't. I laughed. And I am so sorry for it." The snowy street was quiet enough that Nora, standing right behind Martha, heard every single word. Martha looked at Constance Albright. She felt the strange, heavy complexity of being truly seen, even if it was a little too late by someone who should have seen her humanity sooner. "Thank you," Martha said quietly, and she truly meant it, for saying it. Constance nodded respectfully and walked away. The icy air over Red Hollow shifted, just a fraction. The battle lines were drawn. Lucian Vale had money, influence, and the law on his side. But as Martha looked at her new husband, and the 3 daughters standing fiercely behind them, she knew Vale had made one fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated exactly what this family was willing to do to protect their home. Val filed his formal complaint the following Monday. It arrived through the county recorder's office as a direct legal challenge, claiming claiming that Elias Ward's sudden marriage to Martha Reed constituted a fraudulent conveyance designed to obscure outstanding debts and illegally shield property from legitimate creditors. It was exactly as calculated and carefully worded as Martha had expected. The hearing was set for February 3rd on the desk of Judge Harlan Pewitt in Millard Creek. Elias read the notice at the kitchen table, his face giving nothing away. "He's fast," Elias said. "He's been planning this longer than we have." "He just didn't expect us to move first," Martha said, sitting down across from him. "Who is Harlan Pewitt?" "A fair man. From an old family in Millard Creek," Elias said, setting the paper down. "He doesn't like Vale, but he follows the letter of the law." Nora, who had been standing at the kitchen counter, turned around. "I want to come." Elias looked at her. "It's a courtroom, Nora. It's not a place for—" "I want to come," Nora repeated, and she wasn't asking. "I am 15 years old. I am old enough to speak, and I have things to say about what Lucian Vale's men did to our fence line last October. The things you told me not to mention to anyone." She held her father's gaze. "Did you think I didn't notice?" Martha looked at Elias. "What fence line?" Elias exhaled a heavy, tired breath. 3 posts were pulled on the east pasture near the property line. Vale's been running his cattle over our grass and then claiming the land boundaries are in dispute. I didn't want to involve the girls." "Papa." Nora's voice was quiet, but it cut cleanly through the room. "We are already involved. This is our home. This is what Mama told you to protect. Let me help protect it." Elias looked at his fierce, unyielding oldest daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at Martha. Martha remained silent. This was his call to make as a father. "All right," Elias finally said. "You come." The weeks leading up to the hearing were agonizing, thick and reluctant, requiring more effort to push through than they should have. But these weeks had real work in them, and work was better than fear. Nora drove that work. She sat with her father every evening after supper, and systematically went through everything. Vale's first approach in the spring of 1878, the second offer, the sabotaged fence posts. She wrote it all down in her schoolgirl's notebook in her precise, even handwriting. When Elias struggled to find the words, she waited with infinite patience. Martha watched them from the kitchen doorway, thinking that a mother who had raised a daughter like this had done something profoundly right. They left for Millard Creek on the 1st of February to outrun the snow, staying in a modest boarding house. The night before the hearing, Elias found Martha standing alone in the narrow hallway. "I want to ask you something," Elias said quietly. "When you stood up to Vale on the porch that first morning, were you afraid?" Martha considered the question honestly. "Yes." "You didn't look it." "I've had a lot of practice not looking it," she said softly. "Gerald was sick for 2 years before he died. 2 years of doctors and bills, and people who wanted to be paid and let me know it in cruel ways. You learn to keep your face completely still. You learn that if they see the fear, they weaponize it against you." She paused. "It doesn't mean the fear goes away." Elias looked down, his jaw tight. "I should have been better prepared for Vale. After Caroline died, I let things go. The truth is, I just couldn't think straight for a long time." "That's not weakness, Elias," Martha said gently. "That's grief. It left us exposed." "Yes," she agreed. "It did. But now we're addressing it. That's what you do. You address it when you can." Elias stood in the dim light for a moment. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I'm glad you were on those courthouse steps that morning." Martha felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "So am I," she whispered. The hearing began at 9 o'clock the next morning. Judge Harlan Pewitt was a stern man in his 60s, with a silver beard and wire-rimmed spectacles, possessing the aura of a man who had seen too many disputes to be charmed by any of them. Vale arrived flanked by 2 expensive lawyers. He wore a tailored coat and smiled at Elias, with the smug certainty of a predator whose trap had already snapped shut. Elias looked straight ahead. Nora sat beside him, wearing her best dress, holding her notebook tightly in her lap. Martha sat in the row behind them, flanked by Elsie and little Clara. Vale's lawyer opened the proceedings smoothly. Your Honor, the sudden marriage of Elias Ward and Martha Reed constitutes a fraudulent conveyance. It was designed to shield assets from a legitimate creditor, specifically, the promissory note held by Mr. Vale, and to illegally obscure Mrs. Reed's own outstanding debts. Judge Put listened with an unreadable expression. He looked down from the bench. Mr. Ward, your response? Elias stood. He spoke as plainly as he did everything else. The note is not due until April 15th. The marriage occurred before any legal proceeding was filed. There was no fraud because there was no attempt to conceal anything. The debt is acknowledged, and it will be paid in full. Vale's lawyer immediately stood back up. Your Honor, we have documentation indicating that Mr. Ward approached the county recorder about a property addendum the exact same week the marriage occurred. An addendum that would have tied the east pasture more firmly to the primary homestead deed, making it significantly harder to separate in a creditor action. This suggests premeditation to defraud. Judge Put looked at the papers, then back at Elias. Mr. Ward? Elias hesitated. It was a brief, half-second hesitation as he tried to untangle the legal jargon, but Vale's lawyer smirked, smelling blood in the water. Then a clear, steady voice rang out across the courtroom. Your Honor, may I speak? It was Nora. She was on her feet, her notebook clutched in her hands, her chin tilted up at that fierce, unyielding angle. Every head in the courtroom whipped toward her. Young lady, Judge Put said, frowning over his spectacles. This is not a place for— My name is Nora Ward, she interrupted respectfully but firmly. I am 15 years old. I am Elias Ward's daughter, and I have been present on that ranch for every single interaction my father has had with Lucian Vale over the past 2 years. I have written all of it down, and I would like to present it, if the court will hear me. Vale's lawyer scrambled to his feet. Your Honor, a child's testimony. Sit down, Hewitt barked at the lawyer. He looked at Nora for a long moment. Old enough to take an oath? Old enough to understand what one means, sir, Nora said. Come forward, Pete ordered. For the first time that morning, Lucian Vale stopped smiling. Nora walked to the front of the courtroom and systematically dismantled Vale's entire narrative. She didn't cry or plead. She executed her testimony with ruthless precision. She listed the exact dates of Vale's predatory visits. She detailed the pulled fence posts on the east pasture line, stating she had measured the distance herself and documented it. She recounted the manipulative conversation on the porch regarding Martha's debt. He deliberately came when my father wasn't there, Nora said, her voice echoing off the high wooden ceiling. Not once. Multiple times. Men who have legitimate business come when the head of the household is present. Men who are trying to threaten the family come when they think that family is undefended. She turned and locked eyes with Lucian Vale. He thought we were undefended. He was wrong. Judge Put stared at the teenage girl for a long, heavy moment. He looked at his papers, then turned a blistering glare onto Lucian Vale. Is there anything you'd like to add, Mr. Vale? Hewitt asked. Vale stood up, his face tight. Your Honor, my interest in the Ward property has always been conducted through proper legal channels. The note is not due until April 15th. Hewitt cut him off sharply, taking off his spectacles. Mr. Vale, I have been a judge in this circuit for 19 years. I have seen legitimate creditor actions, and I have seen harassment dressed up in a creditor's clothing. I know the difference by now. Hewitt slammed his gavel down. Mr. Ward will make the April payment. Any question of fraudulent conveyance regarding the marriage is entirely unsubstantiated by the evidence presented. The complaint is dismissed. The courtroom exhaled all at once. Vale stood perfectly still, his face flushed with humiliated fury. He picked up his expensive hat and marched out the double doors, his lawyers scrambling behind him. Nora stood at the front of the room, her hands shaking as she lowered her notebook. She turned around. Elias crossed the room in 4 massive strides and wrapped his arms around his fierce, brilliant daughter. Nora buried her face in her father's shoulder, letting out a muffled, broken sob of total relief. Martha sat in her row holding tightly to Elsie and Clara, but then she noticed movement at the back of the room. Constance Albright stood up. She walked all the way to the front and stopped before Martha. "I brought 3 others," Constance said quietly, gesturing to 3 women standing near the doors. "Women whose family's veil has done this too. We were prepared to testify. We had dates and letters and everything." Constance looked at Nora, smiling softly. "Turns out, we didn't need to." Martha looked at the woman who had laughed at her a month ago, feeling the profound weight of a community finally closing ranks around her. "Thank you for coming anyway," Martha said, and she truly meant it. Spring came to Montana, the way it always did, argumentatively. Warm days were followed by sudden cold snaps and weeks of thick mud, but finally, a morning arrived when the air fundamentally changed. You stepped outside, and something in your chest loosened that you hadn't even realized was clenched tight. Martha stepped onto the wraparound porch with her morning coffee and let herself feel the warm breeze. The east pasture was flushing, a vibrant, living green. The payment had been delivered to Vale's lawyer on April 14th, one day early. Lucian Vale had accepted it and vanished. Clara burst out the front door, running into the yard with her arms wide open, greeting the good weather with her entire body. Elsie walked out much quieter, standing beside Martha on the porch. The middle child had begun talking more, not dramatically, but steadily, like water finding its natural level. She had started reading to Clara at night and helping Martha bake without ever having to be asked. "Nora got a letter," Elsie said softly. Martha looked down. "From who?" "The schoolmaster in Red Hollow. She applied for an assistant teaching position back in February. He wants to meet with her." Elsie paused, choosing her words carefully. She said she wanted to do something, not just keep the house, something that was hers. Martha looked out at the yard, a deep, profound pride swelling in her heart. Nora had been holding the household together since she was 13. She had done it with a stubborn, exhausting love, and she deserved a life that belonged solely to her. "Good," Martha smiled. "Are you happy for her?" "Very," Elsie nodded, "even if it means she's not here as much." An hour later, Elias walked up from the barn. He had been working since sunrise, but he stopped, leaning his lightly muscular frame against the porch post, holding his own cup of coffee. "Elsie tell you about Nora's letter?" he asked. "She did." "I don't know when she stopped telling you things first," Elias sighed, a fond, bittersweet smile on his face. "She started carrying things herself." "That's not a bad thing, Elias," Martha said gently. "Just a different thing." Elias looked at her sideways, the harsh lines of his face softened by the morning light. "Is it strange? Living in someone else's house? Building what we're building here, whatever it is?" Martha considered the question with the same deliberate honesty she gave everything. She looked at the sturdy wooden beams, at the girls laughing in the yard, and at the good, decent man standing beside her. "I stopped thinking of it as someone else's house," Martha said quietly. "I'm not sure exactly when. Sometime between the barn roof and the courthouse, I think." Elias was quiet for a long moment. He reached out, his rough hand gently covering hers where it rested on the porch rail. "Good." Martha stood on the porch, feeling the solid warmth of his hand over hers. She thought about the courthouse steps where she had stood with $41 and nowhere to go. She thought about all the ways the world had looked at her and found her wanting. Too large, too poor, too much trouble, too little value. She had carried other people's cruel assessments of her for so long that she had almost confused them for her own. But she was done confusing them. What she was, what she had always been, was the woman who climbed a frozen roof to pull a terrified child back from the edge. The woman who stood down a predator and made him show his hand. The woman who baked apple cake in a blizzard to remind a broken family what home tasted like. The woman who stayed when every self-preserving instinct told her to run. She had not saved this family through the things the world traditionally rewarded in women. She had saved it by refusing to leave. That was enough. It had always been enough. She had just needed long enough in this house, with these children and this stubborn, decent cowboy, to finally believe it about herself. Clara came running back across the yard, her braids entirely undone, triumphantly carrying a thoroughly unamused barn cat in her arms. "Martha, I caught him! Can we keep him inside?" "He's a barn cat, Clara," Martha laughed, holding her arms open as the little girl scrambled up the porch steps and threw herself cat and all into Martha's warm, solid embrace. Some people are not discarded by the world because they are worthless. They are discarded because the world is careless, afraid, and does not yet know what it is throwing away. Martha Ward knew her worth now. She had earned the knowing one cold morning at a time, and as Elias wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close as they watched their daughters play in the spring sun, Martha knew she intended to keep that worth for the rest of her life.